I just one announcement to make, and just a few off-the-cuff remarks. May 6th at a few other folks coming in. May 6th at the La Plata campus is the reading for our Student Connections magazine, literary magazine, that contains poems, stories, photographs, artwork from students and faculty at CSM and some other people. So it's always a fun family event. And I invite you all up to that. After the reading tonight, there will be books on sale outside, and Demetria Martinez will be glad to sign your books. As my friend Michael always says, they will make great presents for whatever holidays you celebrate and come up great gifts, etc. I know some of you have copies already, which is good, but please get more. To introduce Demetria Martinez, you've all seen her bio and her life as a writer, as a poet, as an activist. There's a lot of talk, I don't need to mention names, but there's a lot of talk about building walls that separate people, about fences that don't make good neighbors, but that make people look only in at themselves and not into other lives. Thinking of Demetria's work both as an activist and as a writer, the image that comes to my mind when I think of the wall is the image, I know I've shared with some of you before that Lucille Clifton always used when she spoke about literature, which is that it can be a window and a mirror. So I picture Demetria in that way, going up to that wall and with her words, with her spirit, putting a hole in it. And that hole is a window. And when you bring your face to that window, you look at the other side and you look into other people's lives. And when you look into their lives, you also see there's a mirror, because you see how their lives connect to you, how they reflect your own life, how they are not the other, they are not the stranger, they are not what you have to fear on the other side of the wall. They're your sisters, they're your brothers, they're your family, they're you. And you look through that window and you see into their lives, and you see yourself reflected, because as you go into their minds and their hearts, you see your own mind and your own heart. And that's what any good literature does. And this is what Demetria does in her work. So I ask you to welcome her, and I certainly welcome her here, and I'm honored to have her.
Thank you very much. It's a joy to be here, and I want to especially thank Wayne and Neil for getting this set up, and I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Can you hear me okay? I'd like to open with a piece that I wrote, the afterword to my poetry book called Breathing Between the Lines. And this will give you an idea of how I came really to poetry. My father's mother, Maria Jesus Martinez, used to call across town from her house in Albuquerque to say that she had been praying for me. A native of Chihuahua, Mexico, Grandma had a rich Spanish accent that pressed hard against the narrow corridors of English, the passage she took to reach her numerous grandchildren. Mijita, she would tell me, I feel like the Lord wants you to read this verse from the Bible. Grandma often had me turn to the book of Isaiah. Moonlight will be bright as sunlight, and sunlight itself be 7 times brighter. On the day Yahweh dresses his people's wound and heals the scars of the blows they have received. Light breaking forth from darkness, strangers that turn out to be angels, poor people inheriting the earth while the rich are sent away empty. Such were the images Grandma pondered in her marked-up Bible, where scripture study tracts written in Spanish were pressed between pages like roses. Given the nature of my grandma's phone calls, it was inevitable that I would come to equate the written word with comfort, power, and magic. I began keeping a journal when I was about 14 or 15 years old. Slightly overweight and too shy to converse with most of my peers, I began conversing with myself in a green and white chemistry notebook. I wrote down accounts of the day, to-do lists, pep talks, and poems. I wrote my way out of depressions by copying down melancholic lyrics, then making up some of my own. After graduation from college, I returned to Albuquerque. I lived for about 6 years in Old Town, which is Albuquerque's original plaza. A few doors away, the names of ancestors who had first settled in the plaza in 1706 were painted on the wall. I made it a habit to go to a restaurant or outdoor cafe and read first thing in the morning. I opened a book of poetry at random, waited for the caffeine to strike, and for a stanza to reveal some secret of the universe. It always did, in imagery that was a far cry from that of supply and demand, which I had studied at Princeton. Whatever job I had, whether waiting on tables or freelance reporting, I did during the afternoons. In the mornings, with my poetry and my journal, I became my grandmother. I came to depend upon my morning epiphanies, those visitations. The Holy Spirit, the Muse, who cared what name mankind had imposed upon the mystery of it all? I felt the joy of Jeremiah, the prophet my grandma so often quoted. When your words came, I devoured them. Your word was my delight and the joy of my heart. From there, it was an easy step, moving my pen across the page. Letter by letter, poem by poem, meanings were revealed. By 1987, I had finished a collection of poetry called Churning. In 1988, my experience of poetry changed radically. That year, the U.S. government attempted to use one of my poems against me in a court of law. The poem, titled Nativity, for two Salvadoran women, critiqued the U.S. role in El Salvador's brutal civil war. The punchline of the poem was, "In my country we sing of a baby in a manger, finance death squads." Indicted on charges related to smuggling two refugee women into the country, I faced a 25-year prison sentence. A year and a half earlier, I had accompanied a Lutheran minister to the U.S.-Mexico border, where he helped two Salvadorans cross over as part of the faith-based sanctuary movement. The two women were pregnant, due to give birth in December. The minister, struck by the parallel with the story of the Holy Family fleeing oppression in Egypt, suggested I write an article about the women's plight. At the time, I was covering religion for the Albuquerque Journal and freelancing for the National Catholic Reporter. The indictment lasted about 7 months. Then I went to trial along with the minister. It was a poet's nightmare in which words so full of liberating possibilities were twisted and used against me, and a movement dedicated to saving the lives of refugees. The nightmare penetrated even the thick adobe walls of my house. My attorney ordered me to be careful of what I said over the phone, given the likelihood of government spying. Her worries were not so far-fetched. In the middle 1980s, the FBI spied upon, among other groups, the Maryknoll Nuns of Cleveland, who opposed U.S. military aid to Central America. At that time, the U.S. was sending over $1 million a day to El Salvador alone. After a 2-week trial, I was acquitted on First Amendment grounds. The minister was also acquitted because we had taken our trip to the border in 1986, the year New Mexico had been declared sanctuary state by then-Governor Tony Anaya. After my acquittal, however, freedom of expression was more of an abstraction for me than a reality. I felt as if someone had cut out my tongue. Writers, after all, talk in rough draft. circumscribe what you say, and before long you are censoring what you write, however unwittingly. For years after the trial, I held emotions in check and treated language as if it were a tool to defend oneself or one's point of view, rather than a music and writing an act of love on behalf of the self that can never be fully known or explained, much less condemned to either innocence or guilt. Nonetheless, I continued struggling to write poetry. In 1990, I joined the staff of the National Catholic Reporter in Kansas City. Before long, I was blaming my lack of creativity on the fact that I had a full-time job. Then, in 1992, a miracle happened. The poet and activist Luis Rodriguez invited me to a Chicano poetry festival at the Mexico Fine Arts Center in Chicago. I remember standing in the back of a dark auditorium and listening to various authors. The evening unfolded. Sandra Cisneros took her place and began reading from her short story collection, Woman Hollering Creek. It was then, lost in the music of her words, that I heard a strange, dissonant note. I heard a voice whose origins I've yet to name. These are the words I heard. His nation chewed him up and spat him out like piñón shell. And when he emerged from an airplane one late afternoon, I knew I would one day make love with him. A number of emotions vied for room in my heart at that moment, but fear prevailed. Somehow I knew that what I heard belonged not to a poem, but to a novel. A story I sensed was already finished and floating in its dark universe, awaiting a ready ear and a blank page. The problem was that I had no idea how to write a novel. Worse still, I didn't want to learn. I said to myself, go to your hotel room, get a good night's sleep. By tomorrow morning, you will have come to your senses. The next morning, thankfully, I was still very much out of my mind. I felt ecstatic, yet deeply peaceful, as I took out the hotel stationery and wrote down the words I'd heard the night before. My lack of formal training in the genre turned out to be a blessing. I could do nothing but sit still and listen. 9 months later, I had completed a novel, or what I prefer to think of as a long poem in disguise, about a Salvadoran refugee and her Chicana and his Chicana lover, titled Mother Tongue. Years later, I was visited again. The first poems of breathing between the lines came to me in a gust of joy one quiet afternoon in Cambridge, Massachusetts. For 3 months, I lived inside that voice. When it ceased, I continued to work in silence, editing what had come before and adding to the fold some poems written in prior years. Maybe one day I will have the courage to believe that what I was following was my own voice, a voice free and whole, talking right over the heads of the authorities, both real and imagined. In the land of poetry, such authorities are the ones who are sent away empty, for poetry belongs to the biblical meek, whose inheritance is nothing less than the earth itself. What I'd like to read next is a poem that I wrote during the period of my indictment, which is a time of great fear, to say the least. This poem is called Wanted, and it was inspired by a poem that Allen Ginsberg wrote that says, America, I've given you all, and now I'm nothing. America, our marriage is coming apart. I've done everything right, got my degree. Now you tell me my English won't do. America, I'm not good enough for you. Better my Spanglish than your smooth talk, America. No, I won't sleep with you, not now, not ever. Ah, come on, America. All I wanted was a little adobe house, a porch swing, 2 niños, some democracy. Now I read in the Albuquerque Journal, you left me for a younger woman. Bought drugs for guns, guns for drugs, destroyed Managua in order to save it, spied on communist Maryknoll nuns in Cleveland. America, your face is on wanted posters in post offices, and I'm on sleeping pills again, America. Last night I dreamed the Pentagon was a great Ouija board spelling out, repent, repent. In half sleep I reached for you, love, but got only a scent of amber waves of brain. I got up for a hit of caffeine, the book of Psalms, and whoosh, I saw the promised land. You don't need citizenship papers there. It's colored and smells of refried beans. Remember, remember who you are, America. Purple mountain majesty above fruited plains, worked by Mexicanos. America, call off your dogs. America, give me a green card, though I don't qualify. America, forgive me if I gag your memory at La Paloma Bar on South Broadway. America, I'm 27 and tired, thanks to you. And thanks to you, I found God on a stoop on Arno Street. America, you claim crime's fierce in this neighborhood. I tell you, it's nothing next to your crimes. The wars we fund start at the packaged liquor store and end twice a year at confession. America, I don't want progress, I want redemption. Cut the shit, we could be lovers again. Don't hang up. America, I'm your dark side. Embrace me and be saved. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I know you can. America, I'm not all bitter. I'm a registered Republican. At parties when friends ask, America who? I introduce you, explain you've had a difficult upbringing. But I can't cover up for you, America, get that straight. Honey, it's not too late. It's not too late. America, the ball's in your court now. I'd like to read a very recent poem, which again gives you an idea of how, for me, poetry and activism, dissent is all intertwined, and that love of one's country involves doing what you can to make it better. In this poem, you'll hear names of places that have been the site of uprisings and protests that have changed in little and great ways the course of our history. To be a poet is to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, ringed by Cox, Ferguson, Selma, Delano, making history, her story, in the right place at the right time. Pine Ridge Reservation, Burke, Wall Street in the chokehold of night, stars like badges, and somewhere freedom, restless as a famished dog. And the last poem I'll read from Reading Between the Lines is called Untitled Number 2, and it's about poetry and bipolar disorder. You tell me there is a place in the universe for those who wrestle with demons. Tell me, what did the devil do with my lost years? Did he eat them? Did he fall into a sound sleep and so spare a single soul from pain? I don't think so. And why, all these years later, must I forgive him long enough to touch with love all that was lost? Forgive myself long enough to write these poems. What I'll do now is read kind of a variety of poems from my book, The Devil's Workshop. I don't want love, not love, but something that when it loses its green, holds its form, like ocotillo, long flutes of cactus, to build a ramada at the threshold of my house, my home, in my name. When I love myself as I have loved you, I will invite you in. This poem is called a Birth Song for my nephew, whose name is David Demetria. Our name is as gold as the grain of the goddess Demeter, clear as the glass counter at Grandpa Demetrio's meat market in Albuquerque. We are all over the map, the hunter and the gatherer at war in us. No one was prepared for the news of you, freak storm. But that accent over the I in Martinez was a bolt of lightning, your mother pushing at gusts of up to 60 miles an hour until your cry tumbled out like thunder. Let sleep ferry you across the days. Soon enough your life will crack open like a fortune cookie. Inside your name will appear, nothing more. Not even your parents know our secret, that our name, though given, must be earned. We must dream our way into being. The next poem, this one's for Neil, it's called Insomnia. You should be sleeping the sleep of the dead. You set out melatonin tablets like landmines, but your monkey mind leaps over each one. You try acupuncture, meditation, confession. You sprinkle the bed with miracle dust from the shrine at Chimayo. Chicana feng shui, the TV sheeted in purple like Lent. It occurs to you to read the complete book of needlework. 10 pages and your eyes close like hibiscus blossoms until the needle of wakefulness pricks your dreams. The noises in your head are shrimp scuttling along the ocean floor, filth eaters radiant with half-life. Already your day is dying like a coral reef. I talked at the seminar this afternoon about love poetry, loving a good love story. And I think of all the love poetry I've written, this is probably my favorite. It's called Untitled. Like trying to capture lightning in a jar, this poem about you, or pointing a wood flute at the sky to channel the wind. How easy it was when I thought I knew the nature of love. Words flew from my fingers in flocks. Now all that I was sure of is burning like a village. I can no more describe love than mystics can light. You tell me to count my tears, but by autumn they'd turned into eighth notes and quarter notes. A composition that never saw the stage, that with luck lives in the throat of a swallow, nesting after a war in a crumbling cathedral. A still smoldering but open door. This poem for you, sweetheart, for you. Interlude number 2. Now you can't write about love without going to the dark side. Day dying in the teeth of sunset, a house ringed by sunflowers, sleep lost like rainforest, love devalued as a peso. I'm the one Spanish word you forgot to look up that might have given meaning to your life sentence. Can you know how it was, driving in the dark to Albuquerque, each telephone pole a crucifixion? El Milagro. I grew up, like many of my generation, speaking English and had to come to Spanish, struggled to come to Spanish later in life. But occasionally I have the experience of not remembering an English word and it'll come to me in Spanish. The miracle. Sometimes When I can't recall an English word, la palabra llega en español, it arrives in Spanish. It flies from the crests of the Sangre de Cristo mountains, falls like roses in winter from Our Lady of Guadalupe's sash. I mean, how else to explain this miracle when you've outgrown the story of the stork? The decision not. I kind of knew at a young age that I wasn't going to have children. I adore children. I think at that time I had a sense that my life might somehow be involved with language, and maybe poems might be my children or something. The decision not. My biological clock ticks, but all that talks are words, herds of them, hordes, hives, schools, tools caked with fertile earth for the work ahead, the said and the unsaid, two atoms flowering, powering peace, a found poem, a sound poem, oy veying, ay yaying, at one with the sighs on the streets, blues and reds, yellows and greens, at one with the seen and the unseen, you and me, our treaty, poetry. Rear views for my niece, Rachel Dolores. She used to drive me crazy. My mother in the rearview mirror, donning her Avon lipstick before easing out of the driveway. I was 5 years old. I was in a rush to arrive. Ernie Pyle Library, the children's room where books smelled like a forest after a storm. I sat on the floor. Enlightenment came easy. If not, there was always the card catalog, tarot of titles. I'm older now, in no rush to arrive. I too feel naked without my lipstick, without a book to open like a Japanese screen, behind which I rest, dream, and rise, then read some more until you arrive. And sometimes a poem arrives like a prayer. It just comes from nowhere, and sometimes it may not make sense at some level, but you feel like you've had an encounter with the sacred. And this is called Clock, and it's dedicated to George Evans. Wear a watch that does not work, because minutes lie, because hours are nails in the heart of God. Let the hands of time tame you instead. Fingers of shadow, fingers of light. The sun sets sail, the sun docks. Time is scrawled on the sidewalk. Open the curtain. Look in on your life against the laughter of eternity. Are you reading? Are you weeping? Are you setting out a blue bowl of fruit? Holiness flowers in the fissures of this day. Steep the seconds like manzanilla. Wrap yourself in the steam of centuries. Take time's pulse, hot in your own hands. And I'll close with a short story. It's from my novella called The Block Captain's Daughter. And the book is about a group of friends living in Albuquerque, and they're all, in their own imperfect ways, trying to change the world. Corey, as I said earlier, Corey, the character in this story, is very much of my generation, grew up speaking English. Parents didn't speak to her in Spanish. And so later in life, she's determined that she's going to become fluent. What the heart says, Corey. You wake up one morning to discover that you can roll your R's. You say your name, Socorro, Socorro, as you gaze in the mirror like a girl testing her mother's lipstick on the sly. You open the curtain to let in more light, then glance around the room. Towels, toallas, bathtub, bañero, window, ventana. 2 by 2 the words come at you, creatures paired miraculously as in Noah's Ark. Soap, jabón, shower, ducha, mirror, espejo. Gracias a Dios, you whisper, thanks be to God. But come to think of it, God has nothing to do with this gift of tongues. Enough bitching about not speaking Spanish, Corey, says your husband, Peter, an Anglo fluent in 4 languages. He sits down at the computer. I'm going online. A day later, a package arrives. Flashcards for Latinos who grew up hearing the language but not speaking it. The tongue-tied who ace classes but can't ask for directions to the nearest laundromat. The guilt-ridden for whom Spanish is a pre-existing condition that flares up when ordering food at a Mexican restaurant, then recedes when the margaritas wear off. For a week, the package sits unopened in its brown wrapping on the piano. You look at it, embarrassed, as if it were a sex toy. Come on, open it, says Peter. Stop telling me how to run my life, you answer, heading to the backyard hammock to watch the sunset. Later, you return to the house. Peter has left a note saying he's at a meeting. You stare at that flashcard package. This is no way to live, you say, box cutter in hand. You slit the box open. You spread the cards on the kitchen table as if to read the tarot, terrified of false promises of fluency. A statue of Saint Anthony, finder of all that is lost, looks on as you read each word, then flip the card over. Stars, estrellas, flames, llamas, stones, piedras. The hours pass. You stretch out on the couch and doze. You dream of summers with your bilingual grandma, how English went in one ear, Spanish in the other, mellowing inside you, a beautiful mole of sound. You wake up and return to your game of linguistic solitaire. At midnight, Peter comes home and smells the burnt black beans you'd left simmering on the stove. You're asleep at the table, your head cradled in your arms. Saying nothing, Peter makes you an omelet. Gently, he shrugs you awake and hands you a fork. Next to St. Anthony, he sets up a small TV he's rescued from the garage so that you can watch telenovelas or hear the rosary recited in Spanish on the Catholic station. He kisses you on the head, then leaves for Brazil. Night, la noche, turns into day, el día. Summer, el verano, turns into fall, el otoño. The kitchen table, meanwhile, becomes a country all its own, with Spanish language newspapers from around the world, grammar books your friend Maritza brought you, and CDs of Cuban music with printed lyrics that Flor dropped off. Lupe drills you on common mistakes new Spanish speakers make so that you will not say you are embarazada, pregnant, when you think you are saying embarrassed. Things begin to happen. When you go for your mammogram, a nurse runs out to the lobby, asking if anyone speaks Spanish. You follow her to a small office. A Mexican woman has misunderstood the doctor's words. She thinks she has cancer. You take the chart from the nurse, sit beside the woman, and hold her hand. You deliver the happy news. Soon the two of you are glorying in the mysteries of benign cysts and calcium deposits that cloud up in X-ray like the Milky Way. One day, Peter returns from Brazil. It's over, you say. What do you mean? I've had it up to here, teaching Shakespeare at a prep school. I've decided to volunteer at Enlace Comunitario. They need some English as a second language teachers. It's your turn to get a day job, Peter. It's my turn to live my dream. I'll look at the classifieds tonight. Geez, I thought you were about to ask for a divorce. Don't exhale just yet. What? Today, no Corey for short. Just this day, I want to hear you call me Socorro. All my life Peter draws you into his arms. Corey, that dry shrub of a name, floats away as Peter, with a kiss, draws out the succulence of the name you had almost lost. After making love, you walk with him around the corner to El Bandido. As usual, you order water, agua, por favor, but this time without ice, sin hielo. Before, you had only enough words to get halfway across a situation, like a car stuck on the railroad tracks. You were unable to cry help in any language that might save you. A steaming platter of shrimp arrives at the table with tortillas de maíz, frijoles de olla, and pico de gallo. Across from you on the wall hangs an Aztec calendar. Here's to my other ancestors, you say. We'll study their language, Nahuatl, together. At last you have discovered the opening in the fence that divides Mexico from the United States, kin from kin, era from era. Tlen Titlatoa Moyolo, your ancestors ask. What does your heart say? The opening was there all along, at the tip of your tongue. Thank you very much.